Welcome back, friends. I am so excited for our next guest. He is the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana. Pete Buttigieg now serves as the 19th Secretary of Transportation. His focus as secretary is to deliver the world's leading transportation system for the American people and economy. He has worked to achieve organizational excellence in the department's operations and to focus the department on 5 policy goals: safety, jobs, equity, climate, and innovation. In his first year at the department, he prioritized supporting the development and passage of President Biden's signature bipartisan infrastructure law. Since the law's passage, Secretary Buttigieg and his team have focused on effectively delivering the investments provided by this legislation, enabling the most significant improvements in U.S. transportation and infrastructure in over a half a century. He's also Chasten's husband, a father of 2, and a Capricorn. We love an ambitious sign in the cabinet. Secretary Buttigieg, it is such a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining me today.
Same here. Thanks for having me on.
So I have to ask, before we get into the hard questions, were you a trains and trucks kind of kid? Like, did you ever even imagine that you would be here now?
I was mostly about airplanes when I was a kid. So, yeah, being able to do transportation professionally is great. And we're just now getting to the stage with my kids where they're getting excited about anything with wheels. So very much ready for that to happen while I'm on this job.
Very cool. Now, during your first year as transportation secretary, you supported President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, the 5-year, $1.2 trillion law that passed a year ago today, November 15th. Why is this transformational law happening now? What is it about this moment that made it all come together?
Well, we're in a moment where America really needs it. Yeah, you look at our roads and bridges, our airports and ports, our trains and transit systems, and they're ready for a historic level of investment. That's exactly what we're doing. I mean, this is more than America has ever done for public transit. This is the most we've done for passenger rail since Amtrak was created. It's the most we've done for roads and bridges as a country since the Eisenhower administration when they got the interstate highway system up and running. So a lot of historic investments that are going to help America compete for the rest of the 21st century. And importantly, one thing that was not considered, certainly when they were building the interstate, is this is also a moment to do this work because every transportation decision is a climate decision. And part of the fight against climate change is getting our transportation systems right for the future.
When you have all of these projects, all of these needs in front of you, I mean, the bridge in Chattanooga is just as important as the lakes in Buffalo. How do you decide what is going to get funded first?
Yeah, it's tough because even with this historic level of funding, we get way more applications coming in than we can say yes to. Sometimes it's like a 10-to-1 ratio. So we really focus on the projects that we think are going to have the biggest and best impact. They're going to create jobs that are going to help equitably with economic opportunity, that are going to make a difference with climate. Safety is a fundamental thing for us. So if a project can demonstrate that they're going to make a community safer or driving safer or flying, whatever it is, that's something that tends to score well. But also the way the model works is there's one set of funds that we use where we really are picking and choosing projects as applications come into us. More dollars than that are going out through the states. And then the state departments of transportation decide exactly how to use them. And one reason I mention that is for people listening who care a lot about how these dollars are going to be used. You should know that a lot of the decisions about that are actually closer to home. And it's worth being in touch with your state or city leaders to see how they're going to use all of the federal funding that we're sending out that's coming from this building, but that we're not directing in a very micro kind of way, that there's really a lot of flexibility and range for different communities to handle it differently.
So who is sending in the application?
Sometimes it's a state. Sometimes it'll be a transit authority. Think, the MTA or BART in the Bay Area. Sometimes it's a city. We have certain sets of funds that communities can directly apply for because sometimes the city and the state don't see things exactly the same way. I know this from having been a mayor. And being able to come directly to the U.S. Department of Transportation and say, hey, we've got this great project that's going to transform our streetscapes and make them safer and easier to navigate, or we want to set up a lane for bus rapid transit that's going to create new opportunities for people who live here. We want to hear about those ideas, and whenever we can, we'll fund them. Sometimes we get an application from an airport, sometimes from a port. We're running dozens of programs. Some of them are completely new, set up by the president's infrastructure package. Some of them were there before, but they just got a lot bigger, so we can say yes more often. The bottom line is we're going to be touching every state and territory in the U.S. with the funds and the projects that are possible through this package.
A lot of times with big pieces of legislation like this, the little guy can feel lost, right? Like the idea of conceptualizing trillions of dollars or even billions of dollars is like, okay, how do you get your mind around that? But one place that we can all understand is the seat size on airplanes, which recently they just did a survey of 26,000 people asking them, is the seat size too small? Overwhelmingly, people said, yes, it is too small. Do you have a plan to give us more elbow room while experiencing the miracle of flight?
So, I'm a very frequent traveler, as you might imagine, and so I experienced this personally. Seat size has shrunk quite a bit over the years. We're taking a look at it from a safety perspective, and we have responsibilities in that regard that have to be based on research about any impact it might have on safety, for example, in an evacuation. But beyond the kind of what I would consider to be the bare minimum, which is safety, there's a bigger customer service picture here, I think. And so part of what we've been trying to do with the airlines is press them on their customer service and make a lot of information available to passengers. You can go to our website right now on issues like cancellations and delays, which have been a big issue this year. You can now see airline by airline. We've put up a comparison chart so you can see how the different airlines will treat you. If you get stuck, will you get a voucher for a hotel? Will they book you on another airline? That kind of thing. And what we found is just by putting that information out there, we've actually gotten the airlines to change. When we decided to put up this website a few months ago, I sent a letter to the CEOs, said, hey, in a couple of weeks, we're going to put this website up, so you might want to look at your customer service commitments. And within a few days, we went from 0 out of the top 10 airlines to, I think, 9 out of the top 10 airlines promising that they would at least do a hotel or a meal. So we're working, both in the official sense of setting rules, but also the unofficial sense of just putting information out there that people can use to try to make sure that the passenger experience is better. And again, I'm right there with you. For anybody who's flying a lot, I'm definitely sharing that experience as a passenger, not just as a policymaker.
And staying on airlines for just a second, because again, this is a place that everyone can really understand. With the holiday season coming, folks are, back out traveling a little bit. What are some of the grants that airports have gotten to better that customer experience with support from the government?
So this is one of the things I'm really excited about in this infrastructure bill, improvements that are going to airports across the country. I was just in Orlando. They're working on a whole new terminal and set of gates there. Other places, it's a little more back of house. Denver, they're updating their baggage handling system. It's not sexy, but it means you'll get your bag quicker and they can handle more flights more efficiently. So whether it's passenger-facing things that you'll see, a new gate, terminal, escalator, bigger security checkpoint zone, things like that, or whether it's a little bit under the hood, maybe we're improving the taxiway, the apron, the towers, things like that. We're working on all kinds of airports across the country and of all sizes. So I was just in Los Angeles. LAX has this famous, they call it the horseshoe when you're dropping somebody off or arriving. Yeah. You got to go through kind of 9 terminals worth of things. So we've got tens of millions headed out there to help improve that road. All the way through to a place like Chamberlain, South Dakota. They have a general aviation terminal. Right now, it's a mobile home, and we're funding them with a little less than $1 million to have a permanent building.
Do you see there being an opportunity to reopen some of the smaller regional airports? Is that something you're working with the carriers on, bringing accessibility to these small towns?
Yeah, this can be really important for smaller communities. I come from a small to mid-sized community, South Bend, Indiana, and where I live now, Traverse City. Both really depend on their airline connections to bigger airports. And that's even more true in very small rural areas. Or to take an extreme case, out in Alaska, there are a lot of communities that don't have any roadway connections at all. It's literally the only way that you can link into the rest of the country and the rest of the economy. So we have a number of programs to support that. We will even help fund those routes to make sure that even if it's not immediately profitable, when we know it's a good economic choice, we can support the gap to keep an airline serving those areas. And that's something that has a lot of support in Congress, and I think it's going to continue.
I hope so. It sure does help, especially for the folks like where I grew up. We had one little regional airport, and if it went away, I mean, that would really significantly, you'd have to be driving to Manhattan. And I'm telling you, people aren't excited to do that, to go to wherever else they have to go. Now, you said that the investments that are being made prioritize underserved communities. What kind of projects are you looking to do to fix some of the harm that had been done by past transportation projects?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. We were in Detroit recently. They have a road, I-375, that cuts almost like a gash. It's kind of depressed. It's down below, so you need a bridge just to get across it. And when that was put in, it largely removed African-American neighborhoods, Paradise Valley and Black Bottom, and it divided the largely black neighborhood on one side from the downtown where all most of the economic opportunity is on the other side. So we're funding $100 million to help the state and the city take that roadway and bring it back up to surface level, make it a boulevard and something that's actually going to connect rather than divide. All around the country, there are examples here where the way a road or a railway or an interchange was built wiped out black or brown neighborhoods, or it served to create an economic or racial barrier in a city. It's why we have the phrase wrong side of the tracks, if you stop and think about that. And so what we're doing is both directly in terms of trying to help in some of these areas where that happened, and looking to the future to make sure it doesn't happen again, doing a lot of work there. So, for example, in South Carolina right now, there's a roadway project that's going forward there. But we worked with the state DOT there to say, okay, if you're going to have to do this expansion, if anybody's housing is going to be impacted, what are steps that you're going to take to make sure that they have good alternatives, that they come out ahead compared to before, and that there's community oversight throughout the process? We don't have to make the same mistakes that were made in the past, and we're working very hard on getting it right. And while we're at it, also paying attention to the jobs that are being created. So, if an investment is finally coming to an underserved neighborhood, let's make sure the workers who get good paying jobs, being part of delivering that investment, are more likely to come from that neighborhood. So we have programs like what we call local hire. Basically means you can be first in line for those good paying jobs in the building trades if you're actually from the area where these investments are happening.
How do people apply for those jobs? How do you find, maybe in your area, how you can get linked in?
Yeah. Well, you definitely want to get connected with the building and construction trades unions in your area, because a lot of them are hiring like crazy. They have apprenticeship programs. A lot of people don't realize that you can work your way towards six-figure incomes in these building trades, whether you have a degree or not. It takes a lot of skill, but not necessarily a university degree, and they can work with you to build those skills. I should also mention we're hiring as a department. I mean, just running these funds, obviously takes a lot of talent. And so would definitely encourage people who want to be part of that future to look at usajobs.gov or look at our Department of Transportation website, because we need people in all kinds of jobs at every level, and pretty much any skill you could imagine. We need it. Just think about what it takes to mobilize. We're talking about $1 trillion investment that's happening across the country. About half of that's on the transportation side. It's going to put a generation to work, and hopefully give a generation that life-defining experience of being part of a major national undertaking.
I like President Biden. I'm a train girl. I love the train. The train's my favorite. Can you tell me a little bit about what we're going to do to better connect Americans through the train system and using the rail system?
Yeah. So first of all, we got to make better use of the system we have. If you've ever taken a long-distance train trip, you've probably been delayed. The delays are frequent and they're extreme. It turns out the biggest reason that happens on Amtrak isn't Amtrak. It's the freight lines. So by law, the freight lines that own most of the railroad in this country have to give priority to passenger trains. But in practice, that hasn't always been happening. So we're pushing to change that and using some legal authorities to push the freight railroads to help the trains run on time, so to speak. We're also making upgrades in the system. So if you look at the Northeast Corridor, for example, that's the most heavily used train system in the country, going from D.C. up all the way through Boston. That needs major repairs, and this bill contains the funding to do that. Repairs that are going to make it more reliable, take care of old infrastructure. I mean, if you go through, for example, we just broke ground recently on the Portal North Bridge. That's in New Jersey. Something like 200,000 passengers a day go over that bridge on trains. It's a swing bridge, which means it rotates out in order for water traffic to pass by. When they swing it back into place, sometimes workers have to take sledgehammers to make sure the rails align just right. This is a 100-plus-year-old bridge. It's from the Teddy Roosevelt administration. We're finally replacing it. So big capital projects like that, small tweaks along the way, new equipment, all of those are going to help us have a better experience of passenger rail, whether you're making these long-distance trips or whether you're zipping up and down the Northeast.
You had talked about how this plan is also going to impact clean energy. And I saw that there was a grant for a port in Salem to expand offshore wind. Can you talk just a little bit about what that even means to people?
Yeah, so this is a great example of how everything is connected, right? The manufacturing of wind turbines, strictly speaking, doesn't sound like transportation policy, but these aren't the kinds of things. You've seen those big blades, the kind of equipment. This isn't the kind of stuff that you can just put in a shipping container and book on an ocean liner or pop onto a truck. And so new port infrastructure is needed to support the construction and the maintenance of this offshore wind power equipment that's going to be an important part of how we get domestic clean energy. And one of the things I love about being in this administration is we're very intentional about cooperating. So working with the Department of Energy, whether it's something like this or the work we're doing on electric vehicles, we're teaming up. Working with the Department of Housing and Urban Development on things like what's called transit-oriented development. In other words, building neighborhoods and city plans and buildings in a way that is thoughtful about how your subways and bus lines are going to operate and putting it all into one big picture as you develop. A strategy called dig once, which means if you're going to dig up a trench or tear up a road to make room for a water pipe or internet access through fiber optic cable, make sure if the next year you were planning to replace the road anyway, just line it all up and do those things together. So there's a lot of cooperation going on to deal with these kind of crossover opportunities where transportation touches another area of policy like energy.
We've seen a lot of push for the e-vehicle market. There's so many folks who are excited about this and excited about the potential for there being chargers around. I myself have driven an e-vehicle in New York City and then had to drive out to the airport to try and charge it. What are we doing to help make EV accessible to people?
So there are two things we really need to do. We need to make them more affordable to begin with, and we need to make them easier to charge. And we're working on both of those things. The Inflation Reduction Act that just passed, which is major climate legislation, includes tax credits that reduce the cost of an EV. And importantly, it includes used EVs too. That's how Chasten and I got our first plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. It was a used Ford C-Max. It ran about 20 miles on a charge, and then it would go over to gas. And it was great, but we could afford it because it was used. So we're working to make it more affordable. And even now, depending on the model, we're getting pretty close to the point where even if your car payment's going to be higher compared to a gas car, you'll save so much on fueling it and on maintenance that you tend to come out ahead. We're approaching that point in our economy. The second thing is charging. So the truth is, charging a car probably has less in common with filling up a gas car than it does with charging a phone. And what I mean by that is the bad news is it takes longer. The good news is you can do it in more places. In fact, in rural areas or suburban areas, most people already have charging infrastructure in the form of a plug in their wall if you have a single-family home. But if you're in a place like New York City, it's a little bit different. And so we've got to make sure, especially in order to reach underserved communities, that if you're in an area, building, a neighborhood where it's not automatically profitable to have a charger, we still need to get those chargers in there. And that's why we're putting federal funding toward making that available in cities. And we're also putting funding towards setting up a network across our highway system. So in the same way that if you decide to take a drive from New York to Indiana, you know there's going to be a gas station along the way anytime you need one. We got to get the same way with chargers, and we're funding the states to do that.
Now, we've talked about planes, trains, automobiles, all of that. For my walkers and my bikers, is there anything coming for them?
Absolutely. Yeah. One thing we're doing is a lot of funding of projects that follow the approach called complete streets. The idea being that a road isn't just about moving as many cars as you possibly can, as fast as you possibly can, especially in our cities, but even in small communities. Making sure that you have good sidewalks and bike lanes, and that it's safe. You got enough crosswalks, that it's a good environment for small businesses and wheelchair users. That's something that was really missed in the last wave of road building that happened half a century ago. But we're working to get that right now. We're supporting active transportation, meaning, walking, biking, because it can be good, not just for climate, but also for congestion. If you just think about how much room you take if you're on foot or on a bicycle compared to in a car. And I'll tell you, if you're in a place like Washington, D.C., where I'm sitting right now, sometimes being on a bike is legitimately quicker to get across town than driving is. I've had that experience here. So it's an area where we're making a lot of investments, and we want to make sure that it's safer and more comfortable to bike or walk. Because if it is, more people will choose to do it. And then there's a positive virtuous cycle, because the more people are pedestrians or cyclists, the more drivers notice them and the safer it becomes.
Absolutely. This sounds like a lot of stuff to have had to try to learn before you came into being transportation secretary, especially you came from being a mayor. Did you use like the Harvard cramming study style of your youth to learn all of this stuff? What was your first couple of weeks like?
Yeah, it's intense. So, the good news is when you're a mayor, you deal with a lot of transportation issues, anything from roads to commuting to airports. That was something I was very used to. And I even dealt with the U.S. Department of Transportation as a mayor. But there are other things, from our oversight of the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy to licensing commercial space launches, that are part of the job that obviously were completely new to me. So when you come in as a cabinet member, they set up a transition team, volunteers, some of whom have worked at the department before, some of whom are just experts in the field. And it is kind of like a crash course. We had endless meetings, mostly Zooms, where they would walk me through everything from budgeting to the organization of the Federal Rail Administration, both to help me understand what was going to be asked of me in this job, and to help prepare me for my confirmation hearings, because you only get to take a seat like this if the Senate votes for you, and they give you a pretty good grilling in the committee. So there's been a lot of that, and there's a lot of on-the-job. I think in any high-profile public job, a lot of it's on-the-job training. But that's where you depend on a great team. There are 55,000 people who work here at the Department of Transportation. Every one of them is more of an expert in whatever it is they do all day than I am. And so I know not to think I'm the smartest person in the room, and I know to look to them for guidance and advice.
And you are so visible. I mean, I would say I can't even name another transportation secretary. I mean, Elaine Chao, of course, who was just the transportation secretary. But what is important to you about being accessible to the public and being visible in this role?
Yeah, that's another instinct that comes to you as a mayor. I think you're used to people, grabbing you at the grocery store, the football game, and bringing whatever issues they have. And you're very close to everything. And so I've tried to preserve that as much as I can, even though it's obviously different when you're in charge of a policy area for the whole country. There are some areas, like we talked about airlines, where I have the same experience as everybody else and I can put it to work. There are other things where I'm never going to know what it's like to commute across some town that I've never been to, but I still need to be able to try to make decisions that'll help. That's where we try to have a good relationship with local government, with Congress, and just get out there, travel, listen to people. We have a lot of sessions where I'm just listening to people affected by our decisions, from a roundtable we just did in New York with members of the Asian American and NHPI communities about incidents they're having on transit and how to make sure they feel safe. To a session I just kicked off yesterday with women in trucking, because we need more truck drivers. And women are underrepresented. If we can make it a better job for women, we can help deal with that issue. And plus, it's the right thing to do. And so you spend a lot of time listening, not just talking in this job. And that's really important to me.
I love that you're meeting with the women truckers. We call them the diamonds of the highway. And I think it can be such a great job for women. And so I'm glad to hear that y'all are recognizing that. Speaking of things that need to be recognized, there's a lot of Republicans who have petitioned to bring that money home and use it on infrastructure packages, even though they voted against the bill. How has that process gone with folks?
Well, look, it's hard not to chuckle when you get a letter from a member of Congress or a senator who said it was against this whole bill. They're like, oh, this is wasteful spending. This is socialism. This is terrible. And now they're suddenly saying, hey, we got this opportunity in our district. This road needs to be fixed. This bridge needs to be done. And they're asking for funding that they voted against. But I'll say, even though it makes my eyebrow go up a little bit when a letter like that comes in, We judge projects on the merit. And so we've got projects going to Republican, Independent, and Democrat areas. We don't care how you voted. If you're an American and you need a new bridge or a road or port or whatever it is, our team does a really good job of evaluating what these ideas are going to mean for safety and for the economy, for all of our goals. And, my hope is along the way we'll turn some of those skeptics into converts. It sounds like a lot of them have already changed their view of the bill now that they see how much it's helping people.
Is there anything about the bill that isn't getting a ton of attention that you'd really like people to know about?
Oh, there are all kinds of things in there that maybe people don't realize. Some of it sounds a little obscure, but it means a lot in a certain area. For example, in the Pacific Northwest, for everybody from tribal communities to a fishery and agricultural economy, it's really important for the fish to be able to get to where they're going. Famously, there's a lot of salmon out there. They run upstream. And it turns out the way a lot of roads were built, there's a problem with culverts. That's what they call where the water passes under the road. And it can block the fish passage, and it's a huge issue. So there's a fund within this infrastructure package to improve, restore, or remove those culverts. We'll probably do hundreds, maybe thousands of them over the next 5 years. Not something a lot of people sit at home thinking about, at least not in other parts of the country, but very important in the Pacific Northwest and a few other places. We have funding for wildlife crossings, not animal crossing, wildlife crossing. And the reason that's important is because there are a lot of injuries and fatalities, I think especially in the West, where people are likely to strike large animals like elk that have no way to get across a roadway. And they've actually found ways to engineer this that will pay for themselves in terms of the investment because you'll have fewer collisions. So stuff like that doesn't get as much attention, but I think it's really important. Third thing and last thing I would mention, we have a lot of funding in here for resilience. We're seeing more and more extreme weather. And there are situations where, a road gets washed out by a flood in what used to be fine but is now a flood zone. They fix it. And then the next year it gets washed out again. Are we really just going to fix it every year, or are we going to actually move it and change it? So we have over something in the neighborhood of $7 billion to work with states to say, okay, what are your biggest resilience needs? How do we make sure your transportation infrastructure is safe from the next wildfire, hurricane, flood, drought, mudslide, earthquake, whatever it is you're up against? And I'm really looking forward to putting those dollars to work so that our infrastructure is designed for the future.
Secretary, it has been a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you for stopping by and helping us to understand this massive piece of legislation that you're helping to oversee. Thank you again so much.
Same here. It's a pleasure.